I would say we can show our faces, why not? Okay, if no one shows the face, then I also turn off.
Hello, everyone, and welcome. We'll begin the program in just a moment. Please keep yourselves muted and turn your cameras off. This is going to save on bandwidth and we'll get a better program out of it. If you have questions, please put them in your chat box at the bottom and address them to everyone. And we will either get to them at the end of the presentation or we will gather them all together and I will ask our guests to answer them if they're able to. And we'll send them out to everyone along with a survey that we will be sending in the link to the recording of this program. Hi, my name is Colleen Stovall, and I'm the Director of Programs and Events for the Miami Center for Architecture and Design. And I'd like to welcome all of you this evening to this wonderful program we have being brought to us by Thomas Spiegelhalter, a professor and co-director of the Structural and Environmental Technologies Laboratory at Florida International University. Thomas has conducted research in Europe, Central and South America, and the US on numerous contextual solar, carbon neutral, zero fossil energy products. Also large-scale sustainability, master planning and consultancies, redevelopmental projects for abandoned post-industrial architectures, and many more. He is the lead on this exhibit we currently have up at the Miami Center for Architecture and Design, the FIU Crunch Design Research Project, Carbon Positive Buildings, Green-Blue Infrastructure Scenarios 2018 to 2100. Now that was a mouthful, and with that, I'd like to introduce Thomas Spiegelhalter.
Thank you, Colleen, for making the introduction. So I'm the moderator today of this prominent panel and the principal investigator of the 3 years EU Horizon 2020 EU Belmont and US National Science Foundation research project on climate change and the urban nexus, so-called the crunch. And I would like to welcome everyone here. Very delighted to lead this panel discussion on sea level rise adaptation and climate change displacement scenarios from now to 2100 and probably beyond. This is a pressing and extremely complex topic that involves all areas of life and survival. In particular, children born in the last years or this year will fully experience the disruptions, the adaptations, and hopefully new opportunities in their lifetime, because every tragedy or every disaster has also opportunities. So parallel to this Zoom panel, we have already opened the Crunch exhibition, as you see that on the right side, which shows carbon positive buildings and green-blue infrastructure scenarios from now to 2100 at the AIA Miami Center for Architecture and Design on display from Mondays to Tuesdays, 10 a.m. to 5 p.m. The exhibition itself has many QR labels that you can scan for animations in interactive apps. One of them I'm going to present to you. And it has been developed by a dozen of FIU researchers, mostly from the GIS department, computer department, and architectural department. PhDs, among them also from the University of Genoa in Italy, and over 126 graduate students since fall 2018. So you will find all the names credited on our Crunch webpage and the publisher's webpage of Franco Angeli in Milano, Italy, and soon Routledge in the US as well. But before we start with the panel presentations, including my introduction, please allow me to introduce to you the eminent panel experts. First, I would like to introduce Consul General Andreas Siegel of the German Consulate General of the Federal Republic of Germany in Miami. Before coming to Florida in July 2019, Consul General Siegel headed the German Consulate General in Ho Chi Minh City, Vietnam, a city well known and prone to sea level rise, constant floodings, storm surge, and large-scale relocation efforts. He was also the first counselor at the permanent representation to NATO in Brussels, head of the Strategic Planning Division for External Cultural Policies at the Federal Foreign Office in Berlin. He was the Deputy Chief of Mission at the permanent representation to the Council of Europe in Strasbourg, France. He led a working unit of the Foreign Office on European cultural policy and cross-border cooperation. He also was the deputy head of mission and charge d'affaires at the German embassy in Lilongwe, Malawi, in Southeastern Africa. As well, he was 3 years at the Federal Chancellery in Morocco as head of the economic section of the embassy in Rabat and as Consul General in Casablanca. Welcome, Consul General Andreas Siegel. And then we have Dr. Philipp Stoddard, who has been a professor of biology at FIU since 1992 and the mayor of South Miami from 2010 to 2020. In 2015, Mayor Stoddard was appointed by the White House to the Governance Coordinating Committee of the National Ocean Council, where he developed a national policy for sea level rise. Mayor Stoddard was named by Politico magazine to the Politico 50 Guide to the Thinkers, Doers, and Visionaries Transforming American Politics in 2016 for his frank explanations of sea level rise and storm surge. Miami New Times named Mayor Stoddard the best politician of 2017, by the way. He's a big proponent of renewable energy. His house and car are powered by the sun. Dr. Stoddard continues to serve FIU as the Faculty Fellow for Sustainability and the City of South Miami as a special envoy for climate and sustainability. His academic research concerns the behavior, physiology, and evolution of birds, fish, and mosquitoes in our ecosystems here of the tropics, subtropics. The next welcome is for Nadia Settleram. She is a PhD candidate in the Earth of Environment Department at FIU. Her research seeks to understand how sea level rise might disproportionately affect socially and economically vulnerable communities in Miami, and how these inequalities of impact influence climate mobilities. Seeteram has degrees in environmental policy and psychology and in environmental studies. She has held research positions at the Governor's Office of Storm Recovery in New York and at the US Environmental Protection Agency's National Exposure Research Lab in Athens of Georgia. The next panelist is Professor Dr. Elizabeth English. She is the founder and director of the Buoyant Foundation Project, a not-for-profit organization based in Briarcliff, Louisiana, and Cambridge, Ontario, in Canada. She's specialized in the development of amphibious technologies for affordable housing and for retrofitting existing homes. She's currently a professor at the University of Waterloo School of Architecture in Cambridge. And her research focus is on amphibious foundation systems as a flood mitigation and climate change adaptation strategies that supports the preservation of traditional housing forms and cultural practices. She worked on projects for indigenous and indigent populations in South Louisiana, in the Canadian North, Jamaica, and Vietnam, as well like Consul General Andreas Siegel. She came to flood risk reduction from a background of many years of research in the field of wind engineering, specifically in the areas of wind effects on tall buildings and hurricane wind mitigations. Our last presenter and panelist is Rachael Streitfeld. She is the commissioner and attorney with a passionate resilience advocacy for the residents of North Bay Village. She majored in Middle Eastern Studies and Political Science, studied Arabic, and lived in Cairo on the Nile River. And we all know that Cairo has as well sea level rise issues. Through her law firm, Brightside Legal, and as a commissioner, she champions green and resilient building code implementations and carbon neutrality for the future. By the way, she's also a Ph.D. certified scuba diver. I think this is very important to mention. Now I will give a brief introduction to some of the selected branch research analysis outcomes and design scenarios, followed by the individual brief presentations of the panel speakers. And the protocol for this panel will be that we have each panel speaker present for 5± minutes. And then we start the discussion and QAs for either the audience or within the panels. So in less than 150 years, our carbon society transformed planet Earth. Today, more than 50% of ecologies in the world are determined by unsustainable industrialization processes. The latest United Nations Intergovernmental Panel on Climate Change reports showing that we are quickly arriving at points of no return in the warming of our planet. Under the 3-year umbrella of crunch, which is translated the climate resilient urban nexus choices for carbon neutral city scenarios and the food water energy nexus, we envisioned and developed adaptive, resilient, biology inspired and carbon positive green blue infrastructures in buildings with self-growing coastal barrier islands on the timeline. And now, 2018 as a baseline to 2100. We fitness tested new, low or high-rise city and building systems and structures as dynamic self-powered hybrids that are amphibiously adapting or floating, sitting in, out on stilts or under the water with the ability to be completely self-sufficient. And all of them are benchmarked against 100% carbon neutrality and the food water energy nexus. All of these artificial intelligence and machine learning assisted research analysis, optimizations, and designs are based on approximately 80-year scenarios in which modeling by NOAA, NASA, IPCC, and the big reinsurance companies like Swiss and Reminic companies placed much of the low-lying areas of Miami underwater, which you see later in our interactive app. As we all should know by now, Greater Miami and the islands is one of the most climate vulnerable zones worldwide. We cannot afford to continue in the same direction. We need new ideas and solutions. And this is why we embedded our graduate students and PhD students in these scenarios, because it's their future that will disruptively change the way we live and work. So in the coming decades, the low-lying areas of Miami are said to be swallowed by sea level rise, combined with increased yearly threats of hurricanes, king tides, tropical storms, storm surges, bay contaminations, coral bleaching, and heat waves. And I just want to show you this slide at the beginning that has been developed by Miami-Dade County including the Miami 21 visions that shows these scenarios. And they are co-opted from so many other communities around the world. And it's really helpful now to see that we are going forward with these tools. Now, however, the sea level rise building impacts tool, GIS data driven, only gives us ideas about the sea level rise and the building impacts with a benchmark. It's called building impact risks. So what we did, and I'm changing now my screen and would like to have from Colin a feedback. Colin, do we see the IDSS app? Can you confirm? Or Elizabeth, can you confirm, do you see the IDSS app? Hello? I need a feedback.
I'm sorry.
I'm showing the IDSS app right now on the screen. Does everyone see it?
I see Miami Beach.
Okay, good. So this is the integrated decision support system that is funded by the European Union, Belmore and Horizon 2020, and the US National Science Foundation. And what we see here is in real time, by activating the sea level rise and the storm surge, how many of the buildings in floor areas and in terms of water, demography, or property is impacted in real time. And this tool will be provided to citizens and decision makers. We're also including here the hurricane categories 4 and 5. And in the middle, we will include here in our beta version, a sectional version of this tool. Now, what's interesting and what is different from the other tools that we have been seen so far that are used by Miami-Dade is that we have here a synchronized simulation that is based on GIS data and the text appraisals office and other AI-assisted machine learning algorithms like Google AI, etc., to simulate these synchronized scenarios, how the service economy in terms of roads, land use will be impacted over time by sea level rise. Now, interesting here is also that we developed both tools for the city of South Miami, which has a sub-award from the US Belmore and the US National Science Foundation to work with us to integrate also strategies how to make the city of South Miami or Miami Beach, we can extend this to Miami itself, to Miami-Dade, carbon neutral on a baseline of the next 80 years. Because when we look here at, and I need to go back to my slide, 1 second. Here we go. Share, 1 second, where is it? Here we go. Slide this down. Okay. Adjust it. And then share. Good. So when we look at this scenario in terms of the renewable resource usage, and we understand that South Florida itself, with a low topography and high groundwater tables, sandy soils, and porous limestones, is one of the most complex water management systems in the world. And we are alive here, artificially kept alive with our living and working environments through a gigantic pumping system. And this gigantic pumping system relies mostly to the majority on non-renewable energy resources. So our research goal is to use carbon neutral resources to achieve these changes. And the question is also, in not far away from Miami, the strongest hurricane named Dorian on record hit the Bahamas in 2019. wrecking massive devastation on the islands, a loss of life with maximum sustained winds of 297 kilometers an hour. The storm surge topped 7 meters above normal tide levels. For Miami, 2.5 to 3 meters of sea level rise by 2100 is possible and catastrophic with storm surges up to 7 to 10 meters. Inundations of this magnitude would physically displace some of 800,000 to 1 million residents of Miami-Dade County, according to Retrofits and Reminic calculations, and we will hear about that later more from Nadia. Besides, most of the infrastructure in Miami is 80 years old. Out of control runoffs, contaminants, and thousands of leaking septic tanks pollute and spill yearly millions of gallons of sewage into the bay. On top of all this, the porous limestone rocks its residents' live and work environments by daily means. So what are the concepts we are looking at here? For that, I would like to discuss this diagram here that is based on our AI and ML machine learning assisted research and fitness tests. So we're looking here at a timeline that is based on the Southeast Florida Regional Climate Change Compact's sea level rise group, NOAA, IBBC, and the Berlin Potsdamer Institute for Climate Change. And we already know that around 2040, based on our research findings and those of others, that the major parts of low-lying areas of Miami and the Greater Islands will be impacted by sea level rise and storm surge in the category of Dorian with 7,000 to 8,000 millimeter or 23 feet height, plus the sea level rise itself will trigger a rethinking of building codes, master plans, protocols, incentives, etc. Also, how to make buildings more, build them and develop them more on stilts with hydraulic systems, floating or amphibious. And the relocation of the population will also be in effect. In 2070, once these protocols and master plans are embedded and implemented, and buildings will be on stilts or will have floating city and building structures, perhaps the society comes back to populate, in this case, Miami Beach. And so it will happen in 2100. So these are the scenarios that have been developed by our research team and then imagined and designed with the newest tools and workflows by our Ph.D. and graduate students at FIU, which you can see in the exhibition. And we also have to understand that a storm surge event and sea level rise that can go up to 3,000 to 4,000 millimeter or 23 to 30 feet means that we have to think about a future for the next 80 years that has an infrastructure, a green blue infrastructure and buildings on stilts or floating or amphibious to tackle and cope with the changes. Now we did a lot of computational fluid dynamic simulations to find out how and where these buildings can be placed for relocation, as you see here. And these are examples of the geocoded beta app that we are developing and should be available in November this year. Here's a situation in Indian Creek where we looked at amphibious or floating architectures for live and work on a timeline from now to 2100. And you see here the sea level rise, and this presentation even includes storm surge or Hurricane 5 impacts. Shows already that the current pumping system that is envisioned or partly implemented in Miami Beach or in other places do not work at that time. So we need to look at longer periods of implementations that also deal with bonds and mortgages, et cetera, as they are proposed by Reminic and Reswiss. Now, Also, another category that we should not forget is that many of the buildings are prone to saltwater intrusion, meaning we will have extensive corrosion. And we need to include those forensic diagnostics and analysis into our app as well, to understand how many of the current buildings that are impacted by sea level rise and storm surge will lose their structural integrity. And now I would like to give the word to Consul General Andreas Siegel. Herr Consul General, are you ready?
Yes.
I'm going to open your slides in a second, this one. And you let me know if you can see it.
Okay, yeah, I can see it.
Good.
Yeah. Well, thank you again for inviting me to this panel. As you've heard in the beginning, I am a little bit of an exotic animal among many experts, but my professional experience has sort of shown me worldwide that we're dealing here with an extremely complex issue on a global scale, and which requires local action in a specific manner everywhere we go. So my contribution is on sort of a little on two aspects. One is to make a few remarks on recent events, and then to illustrate a little bit my experience in a very vulnerable city, which is Ho Chi Minh City in Vietnam, which actually illustrates a little bit the future where we might go here in Miami if nothing drastic is being done. So recent events, I find the last week or so was relatively encouraging on the sort of on the macro scale. You had the climate summit on 27-28 April with new commitments which were made by the European Union and the US to go even further with the goals that they set themselves for 2030. And with the European Union, you have an integrated action plan already in place for 27 countries in Europe, which is in itself remarkable. Almost on the same day, we had a very interesting decision by the German Supreme Court, which basically criticized the German government for violating the constitution, which in Germany includes a paragraph on climate protection. And this violation consists in the way that the government policy at the moment is only detailed and sort of directly addressing issues until the year 2030 and not in detail beyond that date. So that is seen as a violation of the legal responsibility of the government to care for next generations. And so that, I think, is still a situation relatively unique in the world, that a Supreme Court of a country condemns the government to take action for the next generation. And actually the government is following. I just heard today from the Chancellor in Germany at a press conference that Germany will now increase its commitments to 65% of emission reduction until 2030, and to reach a climate neutrality in 2045 instead of 2050 as was the original plan. And there will be a law which will probably will be passed in the next 2 weeks or so, and it will then have the parliamentary procedure, but it will be in effect before 2022. So these are some, let's say, hopeful developments on the political, in the political arena ahead of the next sequence of the Paris agenda, which will be in Glasgow in November, I believe, this year. But I think for in order to understand the danger and the challenge we are facing in the United States and in Europe, it is good to take a look at places where you don't have the opportunity to go so often. As I lived in Ho Chi Minh City, I can just illustrate you that topic. Could you go back to the country slide, please, to Vietnam?
Yeah.
So here, there is a little fuzzy area in the bottom, on the bottom of my screen. I see, but hopefully you can see Ho Chi Minh City is in the southern part of Vietnam, which is a very long, stretched out country, and in the there is the Ho Chi Minh City and about 60 kilometers or so from the ocean. And then you have the Mekong Delta just below it until the frontier of the border of Cambodia. And these areas, the coastal areas, are among the most vulnerable areas. Only Ho Chi Minh City alone has covers about 800 square miles. It has at least 11 million inhabitants, with about 5,000 per square mile. 40% of the city is less than 1 meter or even less than 3 feet above sea level. So you have sort of groundwater extraction, you have building and construction pollution, and you have also other phenomena. So that a normal year will bring you at least a week or two every year of normal flooding in the pictures that you can see here. This is one, so you're totally underwater when you're going on a motorbike. And this extremely dangerous scene, I had difficulty sort of believing that this was real. But this shows a situation where apparently at least 5 foot or 6 foot sea level rise happened, flooding, and people are just mounting on electric cables, which hopefully don't function at that moment, to go from one place to another. And now in this situation, the City Council of Ho Chi Minh City has decided to go even further of sort of aggravating this problem. Please, the next slide. This shows you a little it's a central part of Ho Chi Minh City, which is called Tu Tien. It's like a peninsula between the Saigon River, and it's also one of those low-lying areas. But what you can see here is already sort of a model with constructed parts on sort of 3/4 of that peninsula. Originally, until the year, I would say 1990, 2000, this was completely a swamp and jungle area with a very marginal settlement. Can I have the next slide? So now the project is to, by the year, I think 2025, to have this kind of picture of that area with a number of high-rise buildings, a financial district on the left side of the screen, you can see, some residential areas, most commercial areas, and only about 1/3 of the whole area has been left sort of in its green and water absorbing state. So there are a number of experts. Maybe, is there another slide?
Nope.
No, okay. So the experts are saying that, that this will, of course, increase the danger of flooding, even without any storm surge, but even with the normal situation each year. And during my time in Ho Chi Minh City, between 2016 and 2019, I have seen it twice that the airport of Ho Chi Minh City had to be closed because it was flooded. So you can imagine a 12 million megalopolis with a huge logistic challenge every day, and the airport does not function for at least a week. That is really intolerable. This is just developments, I think, which we don't want to have here. So I am very, it's obvious that in other countries, and Vietnam being a rather authoritarian style government, it still leads to social and humanitarian crises and problems, and can lead to political instability with all the economic and political and other impacts that this has. So I'm very interested in learning more about the situation here in Miami as it's seen by the different experts. And thank you very much again for inviting me.
Thank you, Consul General Andreas Siegel. Now let's have Dr. Philipp Stoddard, the former mayor of South Miami, taking the panel. Thank you. Philipp? Good. We see the slides.
Very good. So, Politico magazine called me and my friend Harold Wanless the climate doomsayers, and I haven't seen a lot since then to make me change my tune. I try to maintain a good gallows sense of humor, but it's a difficult situation we're facing, and architects, I think, have a very important role to play in this solution, but it's maybe not what people think. So let's see if this is going to work. So in Miami, you're never very far from the water. This is our backyard. The water table's there on the left, just a few feet down below the surface, and we bring it up so that we can live closer to it by choice. And when we first arrived in Miami, a friend said, in Miami, you'll be happier if you spend more time on the water and less time in a car, and it's been absolutely true. But my wife, Gray, is an architect, and she was trying to get her head around what the climate has done and what sea level rise has done over the course of the Earth's history. And like me, she gets tangled up in all of the different eons and epochs and so forth. So she decided to straighten it out, and she took the Charles Eames approach of going backwards in time by powers of 10. Eames, of course, moved away from the Earth in powers of 10. She went back in powers of 10, and she first did this for herself, and it was such a cool study that she wound up making a whole project out of it. And if you want to see it yourself, you can go to her website, climatex10.net. A really fascinating way to see what has happened. But I like to use it as a tool to understand where we've been and where we're going. So this is one of the figures from Climate X10, and if your little picture of the people is in the way, you can move it. But what she's done here is she's shown a number of things. The sea level at the bottom is in blue. The human population is in red. The temperature is in brown, and then the CO2 concentrations in black. And this is over the past 1,000 years. Okay, so this is a 1,000-year view. And you can get a sense of what's going on. And then we'll go to the 10,000-year history, and you can see how our view of things changes. But there's a very important thing that jumps out here, and that is if you look at sea level rise, you see that the sea level rose from about 8,000 years ago, or actually 10,000 years ago. Whoops, come back to maybe 6,000 BC, and then it's been flat. And this flat period is the length of recorded human history. So as far as we as a species and as a civilization remember, the Earth's sea level has always stayed the same. So we think of land as being permanent. We think of things we build as being there until they sort of crumble of their own devices. We've never had to think about the idea of the sea rapidly moving up or rapidly moving down. And of course it did throughout human history, earlier history, before we began writing stuff down. But since we began writing things down, buildings have been permanent, structures have been permanent, the land has been permanent. This is changing. And it's a real piece of work to get our head around this. So to do this, let's go back in time 100 million years. This is one of the images you can get. And we're going to take this one apart kind of carefully because this is a very important one. This big red arrow says, we are here. We are here in terms of parts per million carbon. Actually, this was last year. Now it's up to not 415, but 420. So let's look at the last time our planet had 415 parts per million carbon in the atmosphere. And that's what this dashed red line takes us to. And it was about 22 million years ago, more or less, that we had this much CO2 in the atmosphere. And so now we can go down to where the sea level was at the time, and it was considerably higher than it is today. And in fact, it was pretty stable for a long period at that height, back when the carbon was higher in the atmosphere. So let's look at that zoomed in. And what we see here, whoops, is that the sea level rise was about 50 meters above where it is today. And it stayed there bouncing around a little bit for a long, long time. So that is a more typical situation for the planet when you have high CO2, CO2 like we have today. So I will bet, and I won't be around to collect on the bet, that we're looking at sea level rise somewhere in the ballpark of 50 meters. So, all right, what does that look like? Well, this was the cover of Jeff Goodell's story in Rolling Stone. And if you plot a 50-meter sea level rise, that's what it looks like in Miami. That's pretty hard to build your way out of. But we'll explore this idea, and some of the other people who are speaking are going to explore this idea. So our lovely friend Peter Harlem, who we lost just a couple years ago, did this very nice series of images looking at Fort Lauderdale, which is above, and Miami below, as we get different degrees of sea level rise, different amounts. So I'm going to take you through the Peter Harlem series here, okay? And you're going to see what happens with every foot of sea level rise up to 9 feet. So I'm just going to step through them. Boom. Fort Lauderdale, a little lower than Miami, interestingly. 1 foot of sea level rise, it starts turning wet. You know, Pete did this in blue. It's not going to be blue. It's going to be brown. 2 feet, 3 feet. I skipped to 5 feet because I lost the 4-foot image. At 5 feet, Fort Lauderdale's in serious trouble, and Miami is getting carved out. Miami Beach is mostly gone. Key Biscayne is gone, and we're getting a lot of inland flooding. Everglades is moving in from the west. 6 feet, 7 feet, 8 feet, 9 feet. There's not a lot to save at this point. Fort Lauderdale is gone completely, except for a few little points at high tide. Miami is a series of very small islands. You know, that's an interesting situation. And if the water were pretty and blue, you know, it still might be a cool place. I am not seeing anything to suggest the water's going to stay blue. But my friend Harvey Rubin often talks about sea level rise as being a soluble problem. And he likes to say sea level rise can be solved by some kid working in his garage. And, you know, the kids working at home, at least, the architecture students, come up with wonderful ideas. You know, all kinds of interesting buildings connected with stainless steel catwalks. And maybe you know the price of saltwater resistant stainless steel. It's extraordinarily expensive, you know, so technically within our reach, financially, another story. But there is affordable housing in the world that does deal with chronic and seasonal flooding. And you find that in the Tonle Sap in Cambodia and down in the Amazon, where the water rises seasonally 60 feet a year. This was on the Tonle Sap. There's some affordable housing, very nice actually, is by the local standards there. And on the lower right, you see the local means of getting around, transit, sort of personal transit here. The other solution we've seen in Cambodia is elevation, putting your building up. Of course, this is makes it hard to bring the piano up there and the groceries, but it does keep you dry, and your house doesn't move around. Same exact situation in the Amazon. You see houses that are elevated, some higher than these, and houses that float. So people have been dealing with this with elevated houses and floating houses, not 50 meters necessarily, but as much as 20 meters. It can be done. The sanitation is a problem. You'll never see blue water. I mean, the beautiful blue of Miami's waters is not going to be there when you put a whole lot of people and the various problems that come with having a lot of people. In reality, in Miami, sea level rise produces pretty squalid conditions. This is taken up in the northern end of Miami, and that is in fact sunny day flooding from that salt water that's moved into a residential neighborhood, and it's just not pretty. So these are the questions I like to give to architecture students and people who like to think about architecture. And the first question is, how do you get your head around the problem of designing for saltwater levels that are going to rise increasingly fast? You know, you saw in Thomas Spiegelhalter's slide, the increasing scale, and that's assuming that the Pine Island Glacier and the Thwaites Glacier stay in place. And it doesn't look like they're going to do that. So it may in fact go faster. And I know that architects can design anything. You know, you can put a building on hydraulic lifts. You can make a building float. What does it cost per square foot or square meter to build? What would it cost to insure? And who could afford to live there? I've always noticed that the people who are well off like a good service economy. And the service economy depends on affordable housing. And so if you're paying $1,000 a square foot to elevate your house on hydraulic lifts or to make it float in style with proper sanitation, you know, the prices start getting up. The Dutch built some beautiful houseboats, which they suggested might be suitable for Miami, and they were about $1 million a piece, not affordable housing. So every crisis is an opportunity, and Nadia Settleram will talk to us about some of these issues, I hope. But I want architects to think about designing to move communities. I think communities should stay together. Much of the capital is often in the human connections. And how do we design communities to relocate? And it's as much a social problem as it is a structural one. But I think it involves elements of both. And if we do this, can we do it better than we've done before? Can we keep families and communities intact? Can we make places for them that are going to be greener, healthier, more fair to everybody than we've done in the past? So these, I think, are some of the organizing questions that I would like to leave with my architect friends. And with that, I'll finish. So thanks for your attention.
Thomas, you're muted if you're speaking.
Sorry, I wanted to say this, thank you, Philipp. This perfectly leads over to Nadia Settleram, which is our Ph.D. candidate on climate change and climate displacement. So please take the stage.
Great.
Thank you.
Yeah, thank you, Dr. Spiegelhalter, and thank you again for extending this invitation for me to participate on this panel. I'm really excited to be here. And yes, Dr. Stoddard's work is a really wonderful segue into some of the comments that I have with regards to my own presentation and just sort of seeing the presentations today. You know, when I think about carbon neutral design, resilient design, sustainable design, you know, architects have this wonderful job of being able to think about the future. And when I see these particular slides, I'm really, you know, it is exciting to see technology play a role in innovation and sort of meeting the challenge of where it is, the gravity of the situation. Because we are in a place right now where climate change is real. Our baselines are shifting. New normals are emerging to some extent, but for the most part, we are, you know, abandoning the stationarity of the past and moving into this space of instability, of deep uncertainty. And so, what we really, you know, need to be thinking about is, you know, how do we design for those scenarios that are somewhat predictable and also not. And so I think that does present this really unique opportunity to do so, and it's really encouraging to see those designs as they emerge. But as Dr. Stoddard mentioned, you know, where my research sort of comes and plays a role is thinking about those exact questions. When I see those designs, my first thought is, who is going to be able to live there? Who is going to be a part of this new resilient Miami? Who can afford to sort of do that? Because the reality of the situation is in Miami-Dade, you know, we are really operating in a deeply unequal society. Miami-Dade County, by metrics of the Gini coefficient, is the second most unequal metropolitan area in the country, second only to New York City. What I mean by that is we are very much operating in this sort of low wage economy. About 47.8% of residents are within the service industry, and they make a median income of around $26,000 a year. When we take a broader zoom out of the economy, what we have are median household incomes of around $51,000 a year for the entire county. And that could be about maybe 3 people on average in a household living off that income. This doesn't leave a lot of room for families in Miami to generate wealth, to spend, you know, to spend their money on other things besides housing. And housing itself, you know, while we're on that topic, we are in the midst of an affordable housing crisis here in Miami. We're a very heavy renter city. About 53% of renters sort of express that they're paying more than 35% of their income towards housing costs. And so, you know, I say all of this, you know, to really ground us in the situation that we have currently. We should also mention that, you know, this is a society of deep racial inequality. Miami was formed during the Jim Crow era, and those legacies, those policies really, you know, have moved with us into the present and resulting in a really segregated society geographically in terms of where our Black residents live, where our white residents live. At the same time, it's a refuge for a lot of different people. People of Cuban heritage, Nicaraguan heritage, Colombian heritage, they've all, you know, amongst others, have all come to Miami sort of seeking refuge. And so, again, I'm really trying to present the context by which I'm sort of thinking about sea level rise, presenting that backdrop. These are the things that I'm thinking about all the time. And so when I think about this challenge of sea level rise, again, a situation where we have deep uncertainty, where, you know, by the unified sea level rise projections, if you take the NOAA extreme value, we could see more than 10 feet of sea level rise by the end of the century. So what does it mean to sort of adapt in those situations? And while I see that, you know, in recent years, there's been a lot of effort by the county and city governments to build sea level rise strategies, and they're putting forth ideas, and I think this is great. This is great progress. I don't see a very frank conversation about migration, about displacement, about retreat. Because migration is a form of adaptation. And where these risks for sea level rise and their hazards sort of become intolerable, people will be moving in response. And so this is where my dissertation starts. This is where I've attempted to try to make some sense of the situation. So I only have one slide. I'm just going to share it with you very quickly. And so you know, for my dissertation, I took a look at current and historic trends regarding sea level rise adaptation, disaster relief. And, you know, when you sort of consider that across Miami-Dade County, there are people who are more exposed to sea level rise, less exposed to sea level rise. There are people of varying socioeconomic backgrounds. And we sort of think about mobility and migration and adaptation. Where are people going to go if the risks do become intolerable? Well, what sort of emerged for me from this literature are 4 potential migration outcomes. And in thinking about it this way, you know, again, as a spectrum of vulnerability, a spectrum of exposure, and thinking about differing adaptive capacities of communities, you know, these 4 outcomes sort of emerge for me. And so I'm not saying this is a predictive model. This is very much where, you know, again, drawing on the literature, drawing on current and past trends as they sort of emerge, this is what I found. And so what we can sort of say is that, you know, we have these 4 categorizations of communities. So the first one are stable communities. These are communities that are not very exposed to sea level rise. They're very, you know, they're socioeconomically okay. They have more material wealth. They are satisfied where they're living. These are the people least likely to be mobile in response to sea level rise pressures. On the other side of that vulnerability spectrum, we have what I call the migrating communities. These are people who are in neighborhoods that are highly exposed to sea level rise and people of sort of lower, again, socioeconomic vulnerability. And so when you put these 2 together, again, this is a lot of the coastline in Miami, wealthier areas, occupying higher sea level rise exposure. You have people who can sort of mitigate their risk on their own. They can look around and sort of say, you know, I can see the sea level is encroaching. I see more flooding. I see tidal flooding. I don't really know that this is the best investment anymore. They can choose to leave on their own. But research has also shown us that these groups of people, of individuals, are also more likely to gain government support, political support for managing for implementing buyouts. So they have just greater flexibility and capacity to be mobile and sort of moving away from these high-risk areas. On the flip side of that vulnerability spectrum, we have what I'm calling displaced communities. These are communities living in low exposure areas to sea level rise risk, but are more vulnerable through, you know, historic disinvestment. These areas, you know, because they have been historically invested in through time, now as, you know, as capital and people flow in the name of resilience so that people can occupy safer, higher ground, you know, if there aren't protections put in place, this could lead to the displacement of those current residents. This really tries to get at that climate gentrification phenomena. And finally, we have trap typologies. People who are living in areas of high exposure, who are more vulnerable. They just don't have the liquid assets to sort of mitigate risk on their own. There are fewer disaster and public relief and public benefits that are sort of flow to these areas. And in general, there are a lot of policies that favor economically robust protection, really favor protecting wealthier areas. And so again, this really leads to these neighborhoods, these communities having lower flexibility and capacity for mobility. So, you know, I'll just leave this slide. I'll just stop there. What I've done for my dissertation is, again, try to apply this framework to Miami-Dade County that's resulted in a quantitative analysis. And I'm moving into a space where I'm sort of interviewing residents across Miami to really figure out whether or not this is their experience. Do they want to move? What are they thinking about? Yeah, I will just stop there. Thank you very much.
Thank you so much, Nadia. I see that there's a heavy chat traffic going on for this topic. We will come back to you later on. So let's have our next panelist, Professor Dr. Elizabeth English. Elizabeth?
Yes,
it's all yours.
Can you hear me?
Yes, we hear you very well.
Do you hear an echo?
No echo yet. And you can share
okay.
the slide.
Elizabeth, could you turn on your camera maybe?
Yes, I'm trying to deal with this echo, which is bothering me. Let's see.
Probably on your side, no? Yeah. But you sound well to us.
Okay,
Try
if it's not,
and then unmuting.
I'm sorry, what?
Sometimes it's fixed if you just mute yourself and then unmute yourself.
Perfect. Can you say something?
Or turn off your audio. Hear yourself.
I will hear you.
The problem is that I'm logged in twice because I got lost and tried to find you again and ended up logged in twice. So
the good news is we hear you.
Okay, yes. Good.
Mute. You can mute one of them.
That's what I have.
All right, we can hear you.
Okay, good.
Can you
So,
please share the slide?
yes, that's what I'm getting to next. Here we go.
It's coming. Perfect, it's there.
Can you see?
We see all the slides. Now just go to slideshow.
I'm sorry. Zoom is usually my friend, and I'm having a lot of difficulty with Zoom today.
I can.
Okay.
Yeah, this is now it's perfect.
That's my title slide.
Yes, we see you. Thank you.
Okay, great. So there we go. So my story started in New Orleans with Hurricane Katrina. I was doing wind engineering research at the LSU Hurricane Center and was an early respondent in New Orleans looking at wind damage. Quickly realized that the wind was not the issue, it was the water. As a result, I basically changed my career and began working on water. I was so horrified at the inability of the system set up in the United States to deal with a disaster at this magnitude, and horrified by the trauma and loss and displacement of so many people. So I began to think of what could we do instead? And I thought, what about if we could get the houses to float? And just temporarily. So they're not really floating houses. Floating houses are houseboats. These only float when there's a flood. So most of the time they're land-based. When there's water there, they're sea creatures. So I call them amphibious. And I don't use the word floating for my work except as a temporary condition. So this is the basic idea that under normal circumstances, this is a section of a Louisiana shotgun house, long, skinny, typical moderate income housing, late 19th, early 20th century. And so if we add something that creates buoyancy, like large blocks of EPS, and if we add a vertical guidance system, like poles stuck in the ground that can telescope out of a sleeve, and a framing system to hold everything together, then when the water comes, it can do this. So that's the basic idea, and I got started working on that. And this is a design that I was developing, and I started working with some students. And let's see if my animation are going to work. Doesn't look like it. Okay, no animations. So with my students at LSU, we built a prototype. It was a full-scale width and partial length of a New Orleans shotgun house. And we built a flood tank around it and filled it with water and watched it float and loaded it up with water barrels full of water to make the dead load. That's the weight of the house. and sandbags for the weight of the people and furniture, and moved that all around to tilt the house. It was stable. It worked beautifully. We were thrilled. And this is an exploded axonometric, sorry, I'm hearing double. Exploded axonometric of the way this works, and a render of how it might look in a New Orleans neighborhood. So why fight with the flood water when you can float on it? The water actually becomes our friend because it's the water that's lifting us up, keeping us safe, and we're not trying to stop the water or change the water or make the water do anything other than what the water wants to do. So that's a very important aspect of this, is that it has a great deal of respect for nature and for water and for the powers of natural forces. So in Louisiana, we found in the process of building our own prototype that there was a place in the backwoods that had been doing this for 30 years at that time. So we can see the same house, dry part of the year, floating when the Mississippi River floods, which floods this neighborhood. Here's, let me go back to this. Average cost of the buoyancy system. This is do-it-yourself, seat of the pants, no official engineering, and they do it for about $5 a square foot. So what I've done is I've taken the system that I developed that's actually very similar to what they were working on in Old River Landing, and fully engineered it and made it as code compliant as you can with something that is not described in the codes, and brought it up to modern standards. Okay, here's another example. I like this because it shows how it works. These don't have the telescopic poles, it's static poles with a sleeve that slides up and down on the pole. This is another house. I photographed this in 2017. It belongs to Jamie Coco. Here's another house in the dry circumstances, in the flood circumstances. And let's take a look at this house in the back, because in 2011, there was a 15-foot flood, and the houses were only designed for 11-foot floods. So look what happened to this house. The amphibious houses all went up, came back down, no problem. Many of the static houses suffered damage. This is Buddy Blaylock's house. He's a full-time resident. He lives there all the time. He even takes his garden on his deck up with him when he floats. And you can see, this was 2011 when there was the very deep flood. You can see how high he is by the relative height of the posts of the camp next door. I also discovered they'd been doing amphibious construction in the Netherlands, but it's all new construction. I specialize in retrofit. We'll get to that in a bit later. When the water's low, this complex in Olderhuske has a road system so that you can get to the houses with your cars. And when the water comes up, the road disappears and you can only get to and from by boats. Also in the Netherlands is this complex in Maasbommel. So here is with the lake at normal level. Here, this is also normal level and from the same view when the lake is flooded. We can also do large buildings. This is a community center in Warsaw, Poland. built along the river going through Warsaw. And this image shows normal low water level as the water's coming up and when the water is high. So this community center and restaurant floats on a very large steel barge section. So a few years ago, I was lucky to get a generous grant to build some amphibious retrofits in Vietnam. So I went to the Mekong Delta, and in An Giang province and Long Am province found a community in each of those places where there were 2 houses that could benefit from amphibious retrofitting. So here we're putting recycled jugs underneath the house. We've already put in the vertical guidance posts. These are skirt boards to keep the flowing water from washing the jugs away. This is when the retrofit is finished. You can see that our sleeves that connect the house to the posts are ropes in this case. There we go, there's the detail. And when we came back in October, it was full-on monsoon season, and this is what we found. It was floating. One of my Vietnamese partners had a drone, so we got some lovely pictures. This was a neighboring house that was up on this road, and we had to move it down into the field. It had to be moved off the road. So after we moved it, it looked like this, and we used wooden block sleeves. We tried experimenting with different materials and different configurations, and here we are, the drone shots of Lac's house in An Giang province. And now we're moving to Long Am province. This is Nang's house, and here we see from the other side how the land falls away. This is the road, the pathway in front, and when we came back in October, it looked like this. So that was the pathway here. Now there's a monkey bridge, and my partner Tien taking a photograph of me from the monkey bridge. We also used the wooden sleeves for this, and we used recycled barrels for flotation for this. We also had an interesting time designing centering devices. We had to make sure that the house would come back exactly in the same place on top of the stilts that it lifted off of. And so this was one of our more successful experiments. This is what it looked like underneath with the jugs held up. And the one thing I really wanted to do to make it a whole lot cheaper was to use plastic water bottles. And so this was my idea for how we would do buoyancy, but the Vietnamese were not buying it. They wanted to see the jugs in the barrels first. Then we finished up that project. I have another project in Canada to develop climate change resilient housing for First Nations on the reserves, because these are people who cannot easily move from their traditional lands. So we built a pavilion on the University of Waterloo campus, and let's see, they were also very interested in our looking at the climate differences, because I'd been working in Louisiana, in Vietnam, in Jamaica, Nicaragua, Bangladesh, places like that. So we tried several different types of buoyancy by making these tiny little docks and using different buoyancy materials underneath them. And then we watched what happened when it snowed and when it froze and when all our little experimental platforms froze in with the ice as well. I'm going to move faster. Let's go to Nicaragua. This is Malacatoya. The river here flooded, mostly because of anthropogenic change. And the native people here were forcibly removed to another location, put in houses that were not their own. They were very uncomfortable. They had no way to make a living. They abandoned those houses, came back here. We're living in things like this. I met someone who was interested in building houses like this for these people, and he asked me to amphibiate them. So we came up with this design, and this is a render. We did not have the opportunity to build it, but notice that we accommodate the different cultures. So in this place, we put a deck around the house so that the people could take their pigs and chickens with them without actually having them inside the house. Let's see. Robert had asked me about some of the economic considerations, and I've written a paper called The Economic Argument for Amphibious Construction, and you can find that on my website. But what I'm going to show very quickly is in the southern part of Louisiana, there is a peninsula that is washing away, and we designed an amphibious system for this, and then we costed it out, and we did a loss avoidance study of this, and this is more than you can absorb in this quick presentation, but it's in that paper. Also in the paper is a study, similar study that we did for central Manitoba for the Pinamutang Band, and this is the type of housing we were looking at, and we were coming up with very large loss avoidance. This is like a benefit cost ratio in those lines. Next project, Princeville, North Carolina, and I'm finishing up.
Yeah, Elizabeth,
so,
Rachael. Yeah.
What?
Thank you. We have Rachael is next, and we
okay.
promised to finish at 7:30.
Princeville, there's this beautiful church built in 1893. This was the first community settled and made official by freed slaves after the Civil War. So it's an historic community, and this is our, let's see if I can, so I'm going to move this along very fast, if I can. So that's putting in the buoyancy. And now it floats up and down. Okay, Farnsworth House, last project. Anyone who is an architect knows the Farnsworth House. It's an icon of modern architecture. It's built on a floodplain. It's supposed to be like that, but every once in a while it's like that. Here are some renders, and here is the animation, and let's see if I can speed this one up as well. So we put in the buoyancy underneath the ground so that it doesn't block the view, and it goes up and comes back down, and we can still see underneath the Farnsworth House. That's my acknowledgements. Thank you very much. That's my website. You can find the the economic argument paper there. Thank you.
Thank you so much, Elizabeth. Also here we have a heavy chat traffic. You might look at it and comment on the questions. And now I'm welcoming Rachael Streitfeld, Commissioner and Attorney in North Bay Village. And Rachael, please allow me to share the screen. So do you see the screen, Rachael?
Yes, thank you.
Good. We can also switch to another one if you want to.
Would you mind putting on, that's exactly right, yes, so that folks can at least see North Bay Village. Yes.
Perfect, yes. Okay, it's all yours. Thank you.
Perfect. Thank you, Thomas, and thank you everyone for sticking around for my presentation. My name is Rachael Streitfeld, and I actually wear 3 different hats in the conversation that we're having. I am a commissioner, a local elected official here in North Bay Village, which is on the screen. That red building on the, let's see, it's the north, not that one, on Treasure Island, the northwest, exactly, where the, nope, on the northwest corner of Treasure Island, the northwest corner, exactly. That is my building. That's where I currently own property. So I'm an elected official here. I was elected over the summer. I'm also a land use and zoning attorney. So I work directly with property owners who are currently building or redeveloping properties in Miami-Dade, Broward, and Palm Beach counties. And then the third hat that I wear is I'm actually a climate adaptation professional. Many local governments, as you all know, are taking proactive steps to assess their vulnerabilities, develop digital elevation models, adopt the unified climate change, sea level rise projections from the compact, and plan for infrastructure and capital projects accordingly. And I am, generally speaking, a consultant on many of those projects from Monroe County to St. Lucie County and up into the Panhandle. So I have a lot of experience working with local governments within the context that local governments have to operate. And I know Phil knows this very, very well, but I think that it's a part of these academic conversations that needs to be more threaded throughout as we're looking at these presentations and the phenomenal technology and visioning work that is being done by everyone who spoke before me. We really do need to consider the practical constraints, because local governments have budgets, they have planning horizons, they have politics. So that's the perspective that I bring to today's panel. Before I go into the sort of nuances of those constraints, I'll just share that in North Bay Village, we obviously are a very, very vulnerable community. We are a small, walkable community of islands in the middle of Biscayne Bay. We were ground zero for the fish kill that happened last summer. And that's because we're right at the mouth of several highly polluted canals. And again, we're right in the middle of the bay, and we have very limited jurisdiction. So when North Bay Village created its Sustainability and Resilience Task Force in 2018, we said we are going to get a hold of the climate change realities that we are facing, and we are going to, as a community, commit to being as sustainable and resilient as possible. And I do have to give a shout out, because the volunteer residents of North Bay Village who comprise that committee, one of whom, Brenda Krebs, is on the in the call tonight. They have just been invaluable. So the way that our community has really used the human resources and the energy of our residents to start combating this issue is really inspirational. We passed a plastic-free NBV ordinance. We passed the very first Florida-friendly fertilizer ordinance in Miami-Dade County. We have a construction site management ordinance that protects Biscayne Bay from runoff from construction sites, of which we have many, and we hope to have many more very soon. We've led cleanups. We had a community-wide march when the fish kill happened. We're doing advocacy for Biscayne Bay every chance we get. We are right now getting ready to plan for major stormwater improvements through our stormwater master plan. And we just are very much expecting to get grant money from the state to conduct our very first vulnerability analysis and create our first resilience plan. So we have been able to do all of these things in the last 2.5 years. And that's a tremendous amount of progress for a small city with all 5 commissioners and the mayor working together, rowing in the same direction, and not getting into political conflicts about whether or not sea level rise is happening and what we can do about it. We have the best case scenario. Local governments don't always have those circumstances. And so the questions of what is the planning horizon? What can we do now? What can we afford to do now? What is feasible to do now in terms of infrastructure? And how do we explain this to residents? These are all very real questions that local elected officials have to answer, and the politics can be very difficult. And my one example that I'll give before I wrap up, because I see that it's 7:26 already, is that right now we are rezoning our residential areas in North Bay Village. And we are in the middle of a very, very polarizing conversation with our residents about how to adapt our zoning code and our building design specifics to a future where there is just more water. I personally am in favor and have been preaching the philosophy of height will help us. Height is good. We need to allow people to build higher so that they can have understories below their property, so that we can have more room for water to move around. We need to have less building footprint and more pervious areas. We need to preserve open space. This is a conversation that is difficult because our existing homeowners are, for the most part, built slab on grade and they have smaller homes. And so the question of privacy and neighborhood character, if a new home that's 4 stories high or 3 stories high with an understory is built next to an existing home, and I've actually had residents say to me, I don't think people realize that I can see into their shower from my bedroom window. I mean, it's literally, it is a very pressing privacy concern. And this is just completely one anecdotal example of the type of, when I say political conversations, I mean the actual things that are happening to people, not red versus blue, Republican versus Democrat political. I mean, what is the public saying? And there's a lot of misinformation out there. So I'm in the business as an elected official of trying to marry the excitement and vision of buoyant homes and green infrastructure and the beautiful images that have been presented here of what is possible with what is immediately practical and what is feasible. And the last thing I will say is that the Florida legislature makes it hard for us. At the same time, they give us money to achieve the goals that they say they want us to achieve. So, for example, a bill was passed this last session that severely limits our ability as local governments to assess impact fees for developers who are building in our communities. For North Bay Village, a community that has aging infrastructure and frankly, dire kind of issues with our infrastructure, we are going to be relying on these impact fees when new development comes into our community. And if we cannot mitigate our infrastructure costs in some way, our cities are going to find themselves in even more dire straits than they do today. So I'll wrap up there, and thank you again for the opportunity.
Thank you, Rachel, for your insights from the community in North Bay Village. And I'm pretty sure we could continue for another week and turn this into a workshop to answer all the questions that are on the chat. I would like to ask Colin. Colin, what's the policy at AIA? Do we have to finish now at 7:30?
Well, we do need to wrap it up, and I can take all of these questions, which will be preserved, and I can send them to all the panelists and to you. And if you guys, whenever you get around to giving us some answers, send them all back. I'll compile them and send them out to everyone in the audience.
Thank you so much, Colin. So let's finish up then and just remember that this complex and extremely challenging topic involves all areas of life and survival, obviously. And it's about our children born a couple of years ago and in the next years as well that will experience these disruptive changes that are ahead, and they will happen. So we need to work all together collectively and find positive solutions. Thank you, everyone, to be on this panel. And Colin, thank you too, and the AIA for putting this together. Thank you, everyone. Thank you.
And thank you too, Thomas.
You're welcome.
Yes.
Elizabeth.
If everyone is interested, the exhibit is up at the Miami Center for Architecture and Design. You can visit our website, which I will put in the chat right now. It's www.miamicad.org. And you can come and visit it and see all of the work that the students and Dr. Thomas have done over the years, I think. And
as well,
look, everyone.
Colin, I would like to add also, all the posters have QR labels, so you can use your iPhone and it brings you directly into the interactive animations and apps that we are developing for citizens and decision makers based on deep literature research and case studies that we conducted worldwide of already built green infrastructures. Thank you.
The exhibit's fascinating, it's incredibly well done and recyclable. And so please come and see the exhibit, and everyone please look in your email for a survey we'll be sending you, because we like to get your opinions on how we did and any ideas for future programming. Again, thank you everyone, to our panelists, to Thomas, to FIU, all our sponsors, the the Consulate of Germany, and thank you everyone. Have a great evening, and thank you so much for signing in.
Thank you. Bye-bye.
Thank you. Thank you.